This video is primarily for people who have already played Inscryption. If you haven't played it, I highly suggest you stop watching and play it yourself. It's out on these platforms, and I can't stress enough how good it is. This video will contain spoilers and will contaminate the gameplay experience for people who are still on the fence. Don't watch the video if you haven't played it yet, I'm serious. The experience is worth the price of admission, and you'll be missing out on the nature of discovery that the game manages to manifest so well beyond the sum of its parts. In this video, we'll be discussing aspects of Inscryption, lightly analyzing its gameplay and character designs, so I can address what I believe to be the game's weakest link in the proverbial chain and tapestry of narrative and artistry. Just to reiterate, as a brief disclaimer, this video is not a handed critique of Inscryption as an entire experience. I think it wouldn't be a stretch to say the game is a literal masterpiece, regardless of nitpicks and qualities anyone could have with it. It's actually that good. The only real burning desire I had to make this video came from my fascination with it. I hope you enjoy. Okay, let's get into it. To properly get into my thesis, I need to explain the Inscryption game and how it works. So if you already understand how the game works, then skip ahead to this chapter or timestamp. And if not, and you're willing to deal with spoilers, I will now be pulling back the curtain and ruining the mystique of what Inscryption actually is. Inscryption is introduced at some level as a board game and an escape room, but this is actually inaccurate. The board game elements of Inscryption are revealed to be invented within the universe of the story itself. The escape room / puzzle box elements are actually a function of the narrative. The Inscryption that we're playing is a narrative, but Inscryption is actually a card game in-universe. To break things down, I'm going to refer to Inscryption as one of two concepts. Inscryption the story, which we're experiencing in totality, and Inscryption the game, which refers solely to the card game that's being played. The card game appears throughout the entire story in slightly different ways. The card game played in Act 2, to my understanding and belief, is the real version of Inscryption, not just within the universe of the narrative. Inscryption the game is actually a competitive, collectible trading card game akin to Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, Duel Masters, Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Card Fight Vanguard, Future Card Buddy Fight, Disney's Lorcana, One Piece, Shadowverse, Hearthstone, Build Divide, Bakugan, the new Gundam card game, and many others. The official in-universe card game is played properly during the entire duration of Act 2 of the story, where players collect cards, build decks, and play cards in a 4-column, 2-row lane structure where damage is dealt to opposing cards and players. Unlike in real-life card games, we, the challenger, can see the next moves of our opponent and plan accordingly, but this might just be an invention of player versus enemy behavior found in plenty of simulated card games, as well as some turn-based RPGs and strategy games. Act 2 of the story reveals that there are 4 card types that correspond to 4 scribes. This actually comes as a revelation, as in Act 1 of the story, you're playing against one of the scribes and only dealing with one card type. The 4 scribes are the signature characters of Inscryption, and they are the staple, mythic master figures of the game's universe. Each of these 4 card types they correspond to require different resource units to be played. These 4 units are the blood of the living, the bones of the dead, the energy for technology, and distinctly, the presence of a certain colored gemstone for magic. In Act 2 of the story, Inscryption is played with a single deck that requires a minimum of 20 cards to be competitively viable. In every other act of the story, Inscryption is played with slight variations that correspond specifically to the scribe you're playing against, with the inclusion of an extra deck or side deck that contains free-to-play cards that serve various functions. Leshy's extra deck for beasts consists entirely of 0 power, 1 HP squirrels that are solely for blocking and blood sacrifice. Grimora's extra deck for the undead consists of 1/1 skeletons that swing immediately and self-destruct, leaving bone units as a resource. Poe's extra deck for technology consists of 0/2 useless vessels that have no effects during Act 2 of Inscryption, but may gain modified effects during Poe's campaign during Act 3. And Magnificus' extra deck for magic consists of a diverse assortment of Mox gems, which act very similarly to lands in Magic the Gathering, as many of the cards in his deck require a certain color Mox to be on the board before they can be played. It's important to note that several of the Magic's category cards do not need a Mox to be played or even have any play cost, but may require a Mox to fully utilize their various effects. Moxes are not necessarily resource units in the same way that blood, bones, and energy is. Every version of Inscryption the game is played similarly, with only slight variations. On a turn, a player will place cards at will, based on the amount of resources available to them. In between turns, if the cards on the board have an attack value or an effect sigil, attacks will be made and effects will be carried out as needed. Cards with attack values will do damage to opposing cards, reducing their HP value, or defeating them if the HP goes to 0. If there are no cards opposing an attacking card, damage dealt goes straight to opposing players, gaining the attacking player points. Players draw one card at the beginning of every turn, unless it is the turn the game is starting. Points are tallied by how much damage is dealt directly to an opposing player and not their creatures. If damage done to a creature is more than necessary to kill it in one turn, any excess damage is dealt to enemy creatures that are in lane behind the now deceased creature, but no points are tallied in spite of this. This excess damage is referred to as overkill damage. When a player is damaged directly, the amount of points they take are placed on a scale. There is no definitive end to a game of Inscryption based on point totals alone. Instead, the game ends when one player's scale is so weighed down by damage points that it touches the table. When an attacking creature hits an opposing player for more than needed to tip the scales, all excess overkill damage is often tallied up in some form or fashion as currency throughout every act of the game. Through the nature of scales, points, and weight, comebacks are only possible if players can magnify and return the damage dealt to them rapidly enough to offset an opposing player's strategies and onslaughts, or if they can hold out long enough with fodder to play cards that may help them reverse the Libra. In this way, there is no definitive point total needed to defeat an opposing player that is absolute. Usually, you can defeat a player in 1 or 2 turns if you have a creature or several that has a high attack value on the board, but more often than not, games that run long will be drawn out by the consistent push and pull of the Libra. During Leshy's campaign in Act 1, Inscryption is played solely with his cards from the Beast category that require blood sacrifices, with a few cards adopting the Bone Gimmick from Grimora's deck. During post-campaign in Act 3, Inscryption is played on 5 lanes instead of 4, solely using post-technology cards that require energy, with cards adopting a variation of the Gemstone Gimmick from Magnificus's deck. Act 2 appears to be the truest and most stable version of Inscryption, with the ability to mix and match cards between all 4 scribes, with 4 lanes, and a single deck to use for everything. Not to mention, there are more unique cards in Act 2 than there are in Acts 1 and 3 combined, with cards that very openly interplay with resource gimmicks from other card categories. And that's the sum of Inscryption the game. Many of the escape room and puzzle box elements that we experience are a byproduct of the narrative and don't necessarily reflect the card game itself. Now that I've broken down Inscryption's card game and how it's played, to get into my thesis, I also need to break down the 4 scribes' character designs and inspirations. Leshy, the scribe of beasts. All beast cards require blood. For any beast card to be played, cards that are already on the field must be sacrificed and discarded. Unless specified, all cards offer 1 unit of blood, and all cards are discarded when sacrificed. Some cards offer multiple units of blood for sacrifice, like the Meat Bot in Act 2 or the Black Goat in Act 1 and Act 2. Some cards can be sacrificed without being discarded, like the Black Cat. Blood costs tend to scale with damage numbers, HP, and card effects and sigils. Simply put, sigils denote a card's unique effects and are universal across the entire game. However, certain sigils are predominantly present only in certain card classes. At the end of Act 1, it is revealed that Leshy is, in some regards, an abominable man with branches, leaves, and mushrooms growing out of his face and body. His arms are twisted vines and foliage, resembling the musculature of human flesh. On his right hand, he's adorned in a bangle of fungi, and on his left, a tuft of furry grass. When he talks, his eyes spiral counter to each other, and his voice is deep and unflinching. Obviously, Leshy rules. He's my favorite of the 4 scribes, but the margins are so tight, it only matters a little bit. He's perfectly unsettling and surprisingly right at home as the scribe of beasts. His namesake, Leshy, comes from the Slavic tutelary deity for forests. Tutelary means bound or specified to a distinct location, and in this case, it's the woods. He's very apparently a tree, nay, a forest personified, a woodland given human shape, the perfect harmony between mankind and the unfettered power of nature. His perfect intersection between man and foliage comes at the literal cost of his own personality. I'd personally argue that Leshy has a vicious nature about him. He's kind with his people like the trapper, the prospector, and the fisherman, but evidently, he's kind of intense with animals, so much so that his deck gimmick is about blood and sacrifice. Interestingly enough, Leshy speaks as if he's narrating a tabletop role-playing game, as if he's the game master. It's hard to tell whether or not he's playing a part, playing a character, and savoring a narrative, or if he actually behaves like this while first dealing with him. It's important to note, though, that much of his time speaking is in the third person. Unless he's speaking directly to the player, he's narrating out loud. It's important to note also that Leshy is indeed the main antagonist of Act 1. He turned the other scribes into animals and cards. He believes his methods are better and says as much aloud. During Act 1, until you solve the puzzle to defeat him, he immortalizes every iteration of the challenging player, whether or not they defeat him in Inscryption, by turning them into cards in his game, which can be seen as a form of kidnapping and or death in some interpretations. His propensity to create photographs is the source of his scribe's power, as he is a nature photographer. He creates cards by taking photos. I associate Leshy with Summertime and the Wand suit in Minor Arcana Tarot. Grimora, the Scribe of the Dead. All undead cards require bones. As a rule of thumb, whenever a card dies, whoever owns that card gains at least one bone unit as a resource unless specified otherwise. This includes cards that are killed by opposing players or cards that are sacrificed. It doesn't matter how a card is killed, but it will generate a bone all the same. The player faces Grimora towards the end of Act 3 and uses her deck exclusively, but the gimmick of her bones appears as early as Act 1 and fully properly alongside her in Act 2. This is a very simple mechanic, and I like it a lot. It pairs nicely with Blood Sacrifice in Act 1 against Leshy, but it's still mechanically different enough to warrant being a separate class of cards. The player has multiple chances to fight Grimora a mere handful of times in the back end of Act 3. Grimora is very plainly and very proudly a witch. Maybe more accurately, a corrupt or insincere psychopomp. A psychopomp is a kind of being that guides recently deceased souls from this life into the next or vice versa. She engages in the dark arts with the same fluidity Leshy engages in animal sacrifice. She may be a very direct reference to Hecate of the crossroads of Greek and Roman mythology, and she also may be a reference to what the wiki refers to as the Kikimora, who, conveniently enough in folklore, may have been foretold as Leshy's consort. When Leshy turned his colleagues into animals, he turned Grimora into the stink bug, which is fitting because human beings associate death often with rotten decay and foul odor. She creates cards by writing details down with her quill and ink, as she is an obituary recorder. I associate Grimora with the autumn season and the Pentacles or coin suit in Minor Arcana Tarot. P03 or Poe, the Scribe of Technology. Technology cards use the resource of energy, which is gained at a rate of 1 unit extra per turn, starting at 1 at the beginning of the game. Though introduced in Act 2 in conjunction with every other card type, this mechanic is the primary focus of the first part of Act 3. It is a very simple mechanic that is the most like real-life card games, more so even than Bones or Blood. Energy must be accrued over time. In Disney's Lorcana, once per turn, a player may place a card face down in their inkwell. Cards in that game all use ink to be played. Over time in Lorcana, a player will have an abundance of energy that allows them to play more powerful cards. This is similar to how lands work in Magic the Gathering and mana works in Duel Masters. As in all games, more time often means more guaranteed energy for more resource-intensive cards. Just as well, in Act 3, Poe borrows Magnificus' deck gimmick the same way Leshy borrows Grimora's, forcibly installing Mox data into your side deck to spice up the gameplay of his campaign. Whether or not he handles this well is up for debate, but that is not the point of this video. The answer is no, by the way, but I'm not getting into it. Energy is simple, effective, and easy to understand. During my second playthrough of Inscryption, I tried out a few new decks for this video during Act 2, but I wound up starting and sticking with Poe's technology deck. It was so one-to-one like real-world card games, I could breeze through Act 2 while barely altering my deck. Design-wise, Poe is a robot. Leshy represents life, teeming, violent, hungry, insatiable, and impulsive. Grimora represents death, stillness, hollowness, yet full within itself. Poe represents technology and science, and is easily the most distinct of all 4 scribes, out of place in that it lacks any organic material on itself whatsoever, but fitting in that it still vaguely presents as human-shaped and fits perfectly as the master of an order of cards split among 4 extremes. When Leshy turned his colleagues into animals, he turned Poe into a stoat. I think stoats are cute. They're small, ferocious carnivores. Leshy refers to stoats as lowly. While I find no apparent meaning in this, I can argue that there may be a deeper meaning based on context clues and quiet evidence provided by the game. If the cards Leshy turned his colleagues into are based on his opinions of them, then the stoat definitely represents something deeper. Poe creates cards by quote-unquote copying the CPUs of robots using a particle scanner, and I suppose then turning them into data drives shaped like cards, like floppy disks. I think as strange as it is, as out of place as it is for a traditional trading card game, it works. It makes sense, given Poe's retro-future techno inspirations. I'm also pleased to point out that I think Poe's copying of robots into cards is arguably the least original form of card making any of the scribes has gotten up to. I associate Poe with Wintertime and the Sword Suit in Minor Arcana Tarot. Magnificus, the Scribe of Magics. Some magic cards need Mox Gems to be played, while others don't and merely provide effects, while some magic cards may need a Mox Gem to be in play to remain on the board. This is my thesis. Magnificus is, holistically, the least developed scribe in the entire game, including, but not limited to, his character design, as well as the card mechanics that he presides over. Magnificus is Inscryption's weakest link, and I'll do my best to explain my reasoning. But to make myself clear, Inscryption is as solid can get. A veritable 10 out of 10 masterpiece. My critique of Magnificus comes entirely as food for thought. I myself went to school for regimented critique and analysis of pure work, so this is just fun for me. Before we get into Magnificus's deck system, let's break down his character design contrasted with everyone else's. We have Leshy, a tree man, Grimora, a zombified witch, Poe, a sentient, sapient computer. So, what is Magnificus? No, seriously, what is he? What is this guy? He's like a tree. He's a bush? Magnificus? Ficus plant? He's green like Leshy. He has that withered branch-like arm. Well, anyway, when Leshy turned his colleagues into animals, he turned Magnificus into a wolf. So it can be argued that he's somewhat furry or hairy maybe? I understand that he's probably a lone wolf and isolates himself literally, but what is he? Also, as it turns out, Leshy popped out one of Magnificus's eyes, which Magnificus does admit is not the worst thing that could have happened. Magnificus creates cards by painting his magical disciples and using them as cards in his deck, which they seem pretty into, which is cool. I love the idea for his entire card class, but I'm still stumped as to any persuasive evidences to his inspirations in character design. Now, to be frank, when I first saw Magnificus in full 3D, I definitely noticed that he shared some aesthetic coding with Leshy. Green fur, hair and leaves, foliage, tree, branch adjacent, ficus literally being in his name. But these qualities never bothered me while playing through the game. Even during the proper introduction of Act 2, it never really pressed me that Magnificus and Leshy were not dissimilar enough. I couldn't escape the thought though towards the end of Act 3, and at the end of the game. During my second playthrough, however, it was all I could think about. Now, collectively as a set, the scribes all have strange eyes. Leshy's eyes spiral in reverse of each other, Grimora's eyes are hollow but glow with the light of spectral power, Poe's entire face is a computer screen that is maybe the most expressive, and Magnificus's eyes are in chroma. They all have interesting silhouettes and are very plainly diverse and well designed. Also, the scribes are all kind of assholes. Leshy entertains blood sacrifice. It's presumed that when he takes photos of animals, he's actually trapping them in his cards, which is adjacent to, if not a direct form of sacrifice. Sacrifice is a means of exchange, the life and freedom of this animal, for a card in my game. Leshy even says aloud to the player character that should they lose, they will be sacrificed. Although this could be argued as him really leading into the role-playing, he still captures the likenesses of players in photographs. Leshy has you, or a version of you, as well as other previous challengers, trapped inside his cabin as cards and photographs, which is definitely a kind of removal of agency. However, I still give credence to the idea that Leshy knows you're not actually dying, because on some level, all scribes are self-aware that they're inside a game meant to be played ad infinitum. But in the worst faith possible, he's up to no good. Grimora's actions indirectly cause ghosts to remain haunted. She shuffles gravestones around and requires the player to unshuffle them to battle her. While I think she is the least troublesome member of the scribes, I still think it wouldn't be unfair to examine her behavior as even a little questionable and selfish. I read all the scribes in the worst faith possible because none of them have given me a reason not to do that. On my second playthrough though, I will admit the soft spot I had for Grimora started to grow a little. I like ghosts. I like ghost Pokemon. Poe appears to be completely and utterly self-centered, self-absorbed, self-righteous, and unconcerned with how its behavior affects other people or things. Poe is indifferent to the state of its robot workers and demands that they put themselves on the line while in its search for strong bots to scan for its deck. Poe demands work from its worker robots to such an extent that one robot experiences a split personality that conveys two very different states of mind. Poe is, again, only concerned with itself in every aspect from within the context of the actual in-universe game Inscryption, as well as the overarching narrative of the full story. Lastly, Magnificus causes his students to undergo trials in order for them to eventually become immortalized as cards in his deck. But these trials are clearly torturous and lead to nothing but disappointment at the hands of defeat the students face by the challenger. It's extremely backwards that Magnificus tortures people for a card game, but that's not to say that the other behaviors of the scribes are passable or acceptable. Now, while Magnificus's behavior and motivations are relatively distinct and believable for him as a painter and scribe of magic, his design and even his deck gimmick strike me as a bit of an afterthought. Obviously, it's not bad. Nothing in Inscryption is bad, but I'm arguing for my fellow Inscryption enjoyers that perhaps Magnificus's card system is undertuned compared to the other scribes, which, by the way, are also severely tuned down to be playable with each other. Magnificus's card system consists of cards themed around magic and fantastic reality, all powered by Mox Gems. I think mox comes from the word mock, as in to say a facsimile, a copy, an imitation, without being a whole part. All mox cards can be played for free, but they're incredibly weak and they only serve so that the player can play more cards, which is reasonable in many game systems, but in a tight, fast-paced system like Inscryption, it becomes unreliable. Many cards in Magnificus's deck can only be played with certain moxes on the field. This is not a bad quality, but compared to the other deck types and card systems, I think this is the weakest and least fleshed out among them, even including the various nuances that can be found throughout Act 2 and post-campaign in Act 3. Not to mention, in every 3D encounter with the scribes, there is some level of a board game associated with them. Leshy and Poe are playing full board games like game masters who don't pull punches. Grimora has a single moment where she initiates a board game for a handful of encounters before shaking the player's hand and accepting her fate. Magnificus is the only character who doesn't have a board game. While it is wholly justified within the narrative, it could be argued that his curious absence further proves his nature as an afterthought. It is not necessary for the purpose of the narrative for Magnificus or Grimora to have a fully fleshed out board game, but it would have been nice. Magnificus's lack of presence in the narrative may have been an invention of the narrative rather than the result of his completed and fully realized character design. That is to say, everything about him is undertuned because it did not need to be anything more. Grimora has more than Magnificus in this regard, which further speaks to his nature as an afterthought. He is, by evidence, potentially the weakest link in all four scribes' design philosophies. Comparing their deck styles and card types, every other scribe's decks have ways to negotiate points in territory. Magnificus's deck is the only deck which makes it very difficult to snowball or even set up. Within the context of the in-universe game Inscryption, there is no extra deck, so having to mill for cards like squirrels and moxes is extremely difficult. But in Leshy's blood sacrifice card system, it's more forgivable to mill a few squirrels for a bigger beast than it is to mill for a few moxes and only having low stat creatures to show for it. Not to mention that there are workaround cards that make the promotion of blood sacrifice easier, like the Black Goat, or the Cat, or the Warren, where Magnificus's moxes do not have such reliable support functions. Remember, this is not a complaint. This is just an objective point from a universal card game playing perspective. An observation. In spite of my thoughts of the limitations of Magnificus's deck, in all four fully 3D battles, there is at least a side deck. I argue that in Magnificus's case, it doesn't even really work, as in his battle, the game replaces the Libra scale system that has been the staple throughout the entire experience with life points. However, I'm arguing that in the instance his deck was properly tuned, life points would not be as necessary to play the game against him. I still think the Yu-Gi-Oh! Life point / dual disc reference is totally fine and fun, but I'm arguing that these decisions, while awesome, still cover up some of his inefficiencies perhaps. Now, the goal of this video is not to fix Magnificus's deck or his character design. I think these things are worthy to point out, but I also believe that Inscryption is genuinely good enough where these potential weaknesses do not detract from how great of an experience it is. I like to think of this kind of analysis as a fun experiment. This is not to fix. I am personally playing around with what it looks like to maybe retune or adjust Magnificus's concept to be more in line with what I got from the other scribes. Just to reiterate, Magnificus's cards are magic themed. Most of them require moxes. Unlike in other deck types where blood, bones, and energy are constant, there are 3 different kinds of moxes, and different magic cards respond and interact with them differently, and it makes playing them a little unreliable. So here's my personal list of all of Magnificus's problems. His design is fitting for Inscryption's narrative, but arguably too safe. His card system is arguably the weakest and most inefficient. It's hard to play cards from his deck because his card system is slow and awkward. This is also why during his fight, as the final character battled, he replaces the Libra system with life points, because his deck type is the least properly tuned against itself and others. All of these decisions made are masterfully and skillfully justified by the bounds of the story, but by peeling back some of the layers, we can see alleged, if any, potential limitations. So now, I present a gimmick to set aside Magnificus's cards. Leshy's cards need sacrifices, Grimora's cards need bones, Poe's cards need energy. Magnificus's cards do not need to change much, but I think all Magic's category cards should be able to be stacked. There are a few card games that get into this stacking mechanic. Lorcana gets into it a little bit, I know, but my favorite card game that stacks cards is the Digimon trading card game. This video is long enough, so I won't go into it in full swing, but basically, in the Digimon card game, whenever you want to evolve a Digimon, you pay the evolution cost and then stack that card on top of the evolving card, perform any effects associated with it ad infinitum until your turn ends. This is also true for other evolution effects like DNA Digivolution, where 2 separate units become 1, and Digicross, where multiple separate units come together in a robotic synthesis. Because no cards in Inscryption ever get this complex, we'll also be keeping mock stacking extremely linear and simple to digest. Okay, Now we've transitioned into the game dev section of the video. As I was designing justifications for my concept, I realized it would be a great idea to explain just a little more how I take the Inscryption card game and why certain things function the way they do in universe. But this video is already a bit longer than I wanted, so I'll be brief. Basically, every category of cards in Inscryption plays loosely like other card games in real life. Here are some explanations and comparisons. Pause the video if you'd like to read them. Anyway, on to the meat and potatoes. Inscryption's card library is understandably small for a trading card game. It is a video game after all. I still believe that the point of the experience was more so about the narrative anyway. In spite of the game's best qualities and worst shortcomings, I think there does need to be more division in the tiering of cards. For example, and kind of for a point, I think with a limited amount of cards, every category should have at least one or a handful of quote-unquote boss monsters that kind of make playing the game more intense and decisive. Decisiveness is a handed problem in many card games, but I think Inscryption should lean into it just a little more. Now, for those of you who don't know, decisiveness in card games usually refers to a player's ability to set up certain cards effectively for a strategy or the ability to pull out their specialty cards or boss monsters to make the win conditions more easily accessible. Anyone who plays card games intensively will understand what I'm talking about, but it's a natural skill that develops over time whenever you play a lot of card games. Here's a breakdown of my understanding of each playstyle attributed to each card category. To put it shortly, beasts are all about offense and defense, technology is about board control, the undead are all about resource accrual, and perhaps in a more fleshed out system would be about discard control, and the magic cards are the most stratified and disparate among themselves. I'm pretty convinced that Magnificus's card system is whack, but not detrimentally so. Every other card system has a consistent 1 resource unit, while Magnificus's cards have 3 resource units in the form of moxes that are diverse and not necessarily super reliable, or at the very least, the weakest of all 4 card categories. I think the stacking system I came up with is a pretty solid fix for that. Before we get into the card designs, let's talk about the sigils first. Like in many real-life card games, the card categories in Inscryption favor certain sigils over others. I think the sigils Magnificus's cards favor don't make playing his deck any better, which is why I wanted to retool this entire system. The sigils I made for Magnificus are all about stacking. I'm still not sure whether or not stacking would be a universal mechanic in this system, but assuming the mechanic is strictly for magic cards, I made a series of sigils for the concept. Okay, rapid fire. This sigil is the shorthand for stacking. If a card has a sigil by itself, that means it can be stacked atop another card. This sigil means that no card can be stacked atop it any further. This is a tricky one. Ideally, if a stacked card on your side of the field takes damage, any card bearing this sigil would take the damage in that card's place. This sigil means that if there are any stacked cards on the field, this card gains the combined attack value of those cards together. And lastly, so far, this sigil means if this card is stacked and is dropped to 0 HP, only the top card is discarded, and whatever remains on the board still has all of its HP. Obviously, all of these things need to be playtested and balanced and properly curbed, but this is just an idea. I'm not pressed about going too extreme off rip. This is a very earnest reaction to what I feel to be lackluster, going in the opposite direction. Now, getting into the actual card/monster designs. When you break down the few cards that Magnificus has, you can kind of tell that the various mox colors all correspond to different things. Orange moxes are for offense and defense, blue moxes are for HP and board control, green moxes are for status. So, I designed these cards around these concepts. I retooled the Ruby Golem to be stackable. Ruby Golem is clearly meant to be a beefier card in-game. It has the top-down sigil, so when it gets to 0 HP, the whole stack of cards doesn't get discarded, which is essentially what happens in-game anyway. Ruby Moxes spawn from Ruby Golems once they're defeated in-game, so I retooled the concept to be more akin to stacking and inherited effects like Digimon. Now, as a stacked card, it counts as a Mox while existing on the board atop one, and it gains the Mox's HP. All stacked cards gain the HP and maybe even the attack value of whatever card is beneath it. I also think that mixed Moxes should be stackable as well. In addition to Ruby Golem, I designed 2 more golems for the Moxes, the Sapphire Golem and the Emerald Golem. They're less powerful than the Ruby Golem, but I've given them unique sigils. The Sapphire Golem has a sigil I'm just calling Tech Stench, which lowers the power of any technology card in front of it. The Emerald Golem has a sigil called Lifeline, which does double damage to any undead card in front of it. Now, maybe this mechanic is a little busted, but like I said, this is just conceptual, and in a perfect world, these ideas would be tuned down later and properly balanced. I also had a fun idea to make these kinds of basic and weak golems even more prevalent with the stacking mechanic by giving them one extra version a la Digimon. Here are the golems' next versions to be stacked: the Rubier, Sapphire, and Emeralder golems. They get a quick spec bump and inherit whatever HP the other golems have left. They keep whatever sigils they had on them, but they also lose the top-down sigil, so if they're defeated, no mocks would be left in their place. They'd just be gone for good. Lastly, in the golem category, I designed a creature called the Mox Titan, which is meant to be Magnificus's Uriuli. When the Mox Titan is played, I think some amount of cards should be discarded from the board, but I'm not sure how many. It has a 3-pronged attack and can't be stacked any higher, but once it goes, the whole pile goes down with it. The Mox Titan can be played on top of a golem or a mixed mox. And that's that for golems. Okay. Here are some wizards. First up is the Apprentice Wizard. I get that Magnificus is only painting his star pupils or whatever, but I think it's important that we have an Apprentice Wizard to get the ball rolling so players don't get steamrolled by other card categories. The Apprentice Wizard has a unique play cost of any mox, which means they can be played regardless of the color mox on the board. It's the basis for any of the wizard cards. It also may perhaps replace the Junior Sage, which takes longer than the Stoke to set up if you're running a mixed mox deck and can't grab a green mox turn 1. Next, I have a Junk Mage, a low special card that can't be stacked any further. He has a unique sigil where moxes in your discard give him stat buffs. Orange moxes give him +1 power, and green moxes give him +1 HP. I think as a consequence of this, he has to be played with a blue mox. Next is the Orb Slinger. He's a simple wizard guy. This is kind of where I got tired of drawing. Obviously, he needs a blue mox to be played, and he'd probably get the 2-prong sigil for fun. Then the Ponderer, 0 attack, 4 HP. He's just a wall meant for defense and stalling. Maybe he gets the Pile Defender sigil. Then I have an Ace Wizard, who is allegedly the final form of the Flying Wizard. And lastly, for some more cross-category play, I have the Blood Witch. She's low power, must be stacked, and has the Immortality sigil, so she can be used for blood sacrifice in case you wanted to run a Beast Magic hybrid deck. And yeah, that's it. These are just ideas. Obviously, more work would need to go into them to be completely efficient. But I felt like going in the opposite direction from how Magnificus's playstyle felt to me, and this was pretty fun. And that's really it. Okay. Now, I wasn't as focused on Magnificus's character design as I was the gameplay mechanics of his system, but I still thought it would be fun to try and tackle what I think a retooled redesign for Magnificus would be. So here it is. After days of sketching and ideating, I wound up not changing much, but I did give him a key difference from his canon iteration. This design for Magnificus is meant to sit as a further contrasting form from Leshy's more humanoid appearances. When you place the scribes at 4 extremes, you can argue that Leshy and Grimora are at one axis, while Magnificus and Poe are at the other. I originally interpreted the dichotomy between Poe and Magnificus as one of science versus magic respectively, but I also see Magnificus's ficus/tree-like inspirations being a direct reference to the natural world, as opposed to Poe's technological world. All of these thoughts were very compelling, so I didn't stress so much about the design. This entire project is less about execution and more about spitballing and brainstorming. It's more about ideating and not at all trying to be a definitive fix for a small point I found in an otherwise completely perfect experience. So, getting into my ideas for Magnificus's reinterpreted character design, I reluctantly stuck with green and the forest colors to intentionally tie him closer to Leshy in a different way. Initially, I wanted to make him yellow like a cartoon broom and imply that he was a broom or some kind of construct made by magic, like a broom that came to life, who mastered the craft. Octopuses are also stated to be the furthest thing on the planet from humans. Earth humans have many things in common with animals on the planet, but it's been argued that Earth humans and octopuses have the least in common with each other by virtue of degrees and processes of elimination. Octopuses have 3 hearts, which may allude to the 3 gemstone moxes that magic cards use for magic. They have beaks and strange eyes that move differently from how human eyes do. I also feel compelled to point out, for clarity's sake, that octopuses are indeed some of my favorite animals on this planet. But I wasn't thinking about how fascinated I am by them while working towards a proper reinterpretation to Magnificus's character design. I saw at least one or a few fan redesigns giving him a cloak and a wizard hat, but I don't think any of the other scribes have such extensive gear or clothing, so I decided not to go in that direction. Also, and probably more apparent to some of you, octopus arms are a reference to popular monsters and concepts found in Lovecraftian horror. I think it would be perfectly reasonable for Magnificus to be a light reference to such topics, although I understand animating, modeling, and rigging these things does take a considerable amount of time in and of itself. Leshy's human-shaped, but he has animal cards in his deck and at least one cephalopod-like entity. It's perfectly sensible then for Magnificus to be a cephalopod-shaped character and have a variety of humanoid magicians in his deck as a parallel. The colors are a bit out of whack, and that's my own fault. I might fix them later, but I'm not too concerned about it. The idea is that Magnificus is also producing his own magical paint for the cards he creates. he leaves behind a cephalopod snail trail of magically charged pigment wherever he goes. Instead of holding a palette or cups, he can just curl his arms and lightly wring the paint out of himself. Also, if he is a painter, he definitely needed to have paint splatters on his character design. That's extra work and nitpicky, but I don't know any painters who can stay clean 24/7. Not getting painted on it honestly ruins a bit of the enjoyment, I think. I also like that he's left-handed, so instead of replacing his branch arm with cephalopod arms, I opted for a mix of both. Anyway, yeah, that's my idea. Whew, okay, finally it's finished. Alright. I didn't do a lot of research outside the game's direct text, so I'm pretty satisfied. I did play it twice, so there's not much else I feel the need to say. If you actually made it this far into the video, thanks for letting me yap about this game for so long. Consider liking and subscribing, or sharing this video with a friend if they like Inscryption and want to talk more about it. I didn't mention this earlier, but I associate Magnificus with springtime and the Cups minor arcana tarot, because I think paint is more akin to springtime creation and dipping in cups than the literal bone currency of Autumn's gravestone pentacles. Big shoutouts to my best friend Ash for all their support during the making of this video. Having a second set of eyes to share thoughts with is essential for serious discussion, and Ash was, as usual, indispensable for my thought process. Thank you, Ash, for sitting with me for so long while I figured out how I was going to tackle this project. I made this YouTube channel parallel to a more serious one in order to discuss whatever I wanted on whatever whims and fancies that befell me. You can find time lapses for some of the art I made for this video over there. And also, before I forget, what do you think Inscryption's weakest link is? Was my video assessment correct? Do you have other ideas for how Magnificus's mechanics could be better improved, or how the other mechanics could be toned down to better suit him? Let me know in the comments below. This video's comment password is BOARD, as in board game, for those of you who made it to the very end. You can follow me on Bluesky, Tumblr, and Instagram under the handle WYRAINE, where I try to make serious work and focus on my greater projects. I might also even update or revamp some of these designs down the line, who knows. The handle RAINEWORKER is another artistic space as well, but it's more exploratory and less strict than WYRAINE. I do have a Patreon set up for those who are interested in supporting my creative endeavors, as I'm an artist first and foremost. One-time donations can be made over on my Ko-Fi. Thank you again. That's everything. Be kind to yourselves, be kind to one another, and good luck.